Hello, dear listener. Before we begin, welcome old and new viewers alike to our calm corner of history. Tonight we drift into a world where ice meets ocean, and memory floats on the hush of Arctic winds. You might think you're just here to snooze, but you're about to paddle alongside Inuit kayakers as they skim across frozen seas. You'll probably doze off before you realize you're practically an honorary explorer. Don't worry, no frostbite required. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you appreciate free tickets to tranquility. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'll guess it's either somewhere cozy or somewhere equally frozen. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast, white expanse. The horizon blurs in a seamless gradient of pale violet and silver. A breeze so soft it barely stirs your hair carries the scent of salt and snow, whispering secrets you can't quite grasp. Beneath your feet, the ice crunches like packing peanuts underfoot, inhospitable, yet oddly inviting. You step onto this frozen mirror, and the world narrows to the rhythmic slide of your breath and the gentle creak of your boots. You imagine a slender craft, a kayak, breaking free from the lip of an ice floe, gliding soundlessly toward the flicker of sunlight on distant water, long before thermoses and GPS. Inuit ancestors ventured out on these same frozen seas. Archaeological records show that Paleo-Inuit groups established settlements in Greenland around 2500 BC, relying on rudimentary boats to hunt seals and fish, a mainstream historical fact you might not have expected. Those earliest hunters discovered that ice wasn't just a barrier. It was a path, a living highway carved in white. Underfoot, the ice could be smooth as glass or cracked like weathered parchment, forcing them to adapt every step they took. You imagine those first kayaks, the frames constructed from driftwood washed ashore by autumn tides, ribs bent by steam-heated bones of seals or walrus, and skins stitched with sinew to form a hull both supple and strong. It's a marvel of resourcefulness. No two kayaks looked quite the same because no two sets of ribs bent identically, and no two skins draped quite the same over them. You can almost feel the grain of driftwood beneath your fingertips, slick with brine, alive with the patience of tides. And if you pause long enough, you might sense that each stave carries a memory of its drift, one limb swept from a beach by pounding waves, another carved smooth by weeks of tumbling under iceberg shadows. Of course, you're probably thinking driftwood? In an ice desert? But there's a quirky tidbit tucked in here. Inuit kayakers sometimes believe that holding a small piece of narwhal tusk against the boat's prow would summon luck, an idea that doesn't quite pass muster in modern maritime science, but persists in storytelling. You can't help but smile at the thought of someone quietly cradling a tusk fragment while inching across shifting ice, half hoping for protection from the spirits of the sea and half just wanting their paddle strokes to count for something. You take a breath and bend to trace a pattern in the ice, like the fossil of a wave forever frozen. In that stillness, you imagine early travelers pulling their rudimentary kayaks over smooth leads, cracks in the ice revealing dark water below, slipping into openings that vanish as fast as they appear. The kayak's name itself means hunter's boat, and it fits. This slender vessel, once sealed beneath animal hides devoid of any glaring color, is perfect for stalking prey without disturbing the fragile silence. In a world where noise could be deadly, silence was everything. Historians still debate exactly how kayak designs diffused across regions. Some scholars argue for independent invention, while others insist on cultural exchange along coastal corridors. You lean into that uncertainty and recognize the beauty of not knowing, because the Arctic itself is defined by its mercurial nature. One day, the sea ice locks into place like a cast, the next, a warm wind or spring tide hollows it out. Those first kayakers learned early that if you hesitate, even for a heartbeat, the sea could reshape itself or swallow you whole. You glide your imagination forward, a young hunter hunched over his paddle, peering at a distant dark patch in the ice where seals peak. He's aware that beneath his kayak, water shifts and narrows, the keel scoring grooves into slushy whiteness. Every ripple in the water above whispers of a seal's movement. Below, in the narrow cradle of the kayak, he senses the rhythm of his carved paddle, simple alder wood, knuckled and uneven, the result of a hand-hewn fashion rather than a lathe. Despite its rough finish, that paddle is everything, the difference between meat on the table and an empty belly. You feel the hush as he shifts weight, aligning the cockpit's snug frame around his torso. The kayak holds him like an extension of his body. On either side, the icy horizon seems infinite until a faint ripple breaks the monotony. He knows the physics of ice more intimately than you know your morning coffee. Pressure ridges where slabs collide, leads open by, or hidden under, newly fallen snow, areas where currents thin the ice without warning. His ancestors mapped these hazards by making sweat-borne lines of colored fat from oil lamps on the ice, noting which spots screamed weakness underfoot. In this liminal space, between frozen crust and black water, you realize how extraordinary the kayak is, a device forged from nothing more than bone, wood, sinew, and skin, yet capable of matching the ocean's edge. It's that ingenuity that let Inuit become masters of a world many still consider uninhabitable. You can almost hear the soft rasp of the skin hull against shards of ice as it nudges forward, dissolving into water when it needs to. You might wonder why anyone would choose this lifestyle of constant adaptation, of hairline survival on a thin sheet of ice. But the wind, crisp as freshly laundered cotton, reminds you, life here isn't just about survival. It's about intimately knowing every sigh of a storm. Every tremor under paw prints of polar bears, every muted shimmer of dawn. You breathe as if you, too, are that hunter, listening for the echo of tusks, the rasp of seal exhalation, and the silent slide of your own kayak prow across an icy lead. Lightning, no, not the crack of thunder, but a sudden gust, scoops a swirl of snow around your face. You blink, and the world recenters. The Arctic night recedes to a pale indigo, early morning light spreading like tear-stained velvet. In that moment you understand, these frozen beginnings are more than a setting. They're a teacher, a mirror held up to you, showing how fragile your comforts are, how quiet your anxieties stand against such vastness. The kayak is simply the tool that lets you respond with curiosity instead of fear. As you stand there, silent, breath-fogged, heart quietly thudding, you sense the ice beneath you isn't just cold, it's alive with possibility. It's where Inuit ancestors first flirted with that possibility, drifting out onto water that would freeze and thaw and freeze again. Their relentless creativity birthed a craft that remains one of humankind's most elegant responses to nature's extremes. And so, as you trace one last line in the snow, you realize the story has only just begun. You step forward to meet what lies beyond that glittering expanse, knowing the kayak, like a promise, awaits you. You step off the drifting ice floe and into a time that stretches beyond any map, back to when Inuit ancestors first learned to coax life from a frozen world. The air feels pinched in your lungs, cold enough to make every exhale a tiny cloud. Your boots sink an inch into the silken crust of new snow while the sky overhead bleeds pale apricot, the same palette that must have greeted those earliest travelers. You follow faint grooves in the ice, ghostly lines carved by sled runners or proto-kayak prows, to a place where survival meant more than just picking up a spear. It meant transforming what little the Arctic offered into the very vessels that kept them alive, thousands of years before smartphones and weather forecasts. Paleo-Inuit people roamed the coastal fringes of Alaska and northern Canada around 2500 BC, a mainstream historical fact threading our story. The names Dorset and Pre-Dorset flicker through academic texts, but to you, they are real humans who once smiled at the same strange orange sky. You imagine a small band clustered around the half-buried whalebone, using flint shards to slice seal intestines for cordage. Their laughter, raspy from cold but genuine, echoes across the tundra. They piece together driftwood fragments, lash bones and antlers into crude ribs, and begin constructing what you'd recognize as precursors to the kayak, sealed vessels stitched from walrus hide, shaped like long eyelashes, poised to glide over ice-thinned water. The process looks like alchemy. You watch as a young woman, her cheeks pink from frosty gusts, bends driftwood until it resists, then cracks. She murmurs encouraging words, hiligak, a term that might have meant bend with care, and eases the rib into a curved frame. Her fingers, chapped and calloused, work sinew through hide, pulling it taut until it shimmers like dark leather armor. Each stitch is a promise. If her lines hold, she and her family will feast tonight. If they don't, the sea will remain unreachable, and hunger may follow. It's astounding to consider that these early craftsmen operated without any metal tools. Instead, they employed antler awls to puncture holes in heavy hides and bone needles for weaving sinew. And long before mass-produced rope, they twisted seal guts into cords so strong they bore the weight of entire families crossing open leads. You lean closer, as if your breath might somehow accelerate that ancient grin on the woodworker's face, but the scene refuses to bend to your will. It belongs to a world that never distinguished a weekend from a workday, where every sunrise was both blank canvas and countdown timer. You touch one of the kayaking skins, thin enough to reveal a faint crisscross of sinew underneath, imagining the scent of oil lamps used to soften the hide. Without that rendered blubber, the skins would crack in the cold. You can almost smell the acrid tang of burning seal fat. A smell that once meant life itself. That same scent probably wafted through pre-Dorset camps as they figured out how to seal the seams, making each needle's hole close around the cord like a tiny vacuum. When the lamp's heat touched the stitched hide, it melted the fat further, sealing any potential leaks and ensuring the kayak could slip through frigid water without a drop seeping in. In this ancestral circle, there's an elder who recounts how their great-grandparents used caribou antlers as makeshift oars when driftwood was scarce, a quirky tidbit that scrambles modern logic. You picture someone paddling with a spiky skeletal fork, teeth of velvet scratching water, and you can't help but chuckle at the ingenuity. There's something wildly audacious about taking the very bones of the caribou you hunted and converting them into a tool that sustains you. It's resourcefulness born from necessity and a reminder that every part of an animal, its marrow, its sinew, its hide, served more than one purpose. As you drift through these images, you sense the precarious balance between creation and destruction. The ice, sculpted by wind into wind-fluted ridges, fractures unpredictably, reminding you that water and ice share a complicated kinship. Your modern mind recognizes covalent bonds and freezing points, but those ancestors felt it all in their fingertips. When ice felt too thin beneath ski shoes, when a sudden spring tide swallowed a summer camp. Their survival hinged on being part scientist, part artist, part shaman. They needed to understand tides as well as spiritual forces, because sometimes the latter provided solace when food was scarce. When the kayak frame finally takes shape, its narrow hull rests on a bed of soft moss laid atop a snowdrift. You sense an undercurrent of excitement. This boat, tiny and tattered by today's standards, is their ticket to seals, to freedom, to tomorrow. A hushed hush falls over the workers as the elder steps forward with a carved ivory blade to burnish the hull's edges, smoothing any rough spots that might snag on ice or flesh. These early kayaks lack the elegant symmetry of later designs, but their irregular curves and uneven stitching speak to a kind of artistry forced by environment rather than choice. You shift your gaze to a second group, families huddled in skin tents, repairing tattered parkas and smoking fish above tiny pits in the ground. Paddy wax smoke curls skyward, staining the pastel dawn. Children poke at a ringing harpoon line, marveling as the sinew whips through the air. Their laughter is sharp and unexpected, a bright note in the Arctic hush. They'll grow into hunters and artisans who use the very kayaks you're now learning about. The sense of community is palpable. You find it impossible to imagine any one individual surviving in this vacancy. Instead, they rise by lifting one another, sharing the knowledge of currents, passing down secrets about which bones splinter best for frame bending. Teaching the young how to read ice like a story written in white and slush. You realize their lives aren't just about making vessels, they're about forging a shared consciousness so tightly knit that each person becomes a living compass for the group. A brisk gust lifts particles of snow across your vision, reminding you that although you're drifting through time, the present moment remains insistent. You feel the bite of wind in your ears and the slight tremor of ice shifting beneath boots. It's as if those ancestors leaned forward to teach you something. The land doesn't forgive mistakes, but it rewards curiosity. If you can move with humility, learning from the slightest creak beneath your foot, you become part of something far grander than any one journey. Statistically speaking, the pre-Dorset people didn't all survive. Some perished to blizzards or misjudged ice thickness. But those who did left a legacy that flowed through generations, culminating in the sophisticated kayak craft that Inuit paddled for centuries. You might think of the kayak as a uniform design, sleek, streamlined, but in reality its appearance morphed bit by bit. Some groups experimented with different skin tanners to repel water more effectively, others extended their hulls by a few inches to carry extra game. These variations spread along coastal corridors, much like dialects drifting across mountain ranges. You hear the deep, resonant voice of the elder again, telling a story about a pre-Dorset hunter who reputedly shaped his first kayak hidden beneath a collapsed ice arch. He found a pocket of seawater warm enough to soften seal ribs and shaped each one by feel alone, without daylight. It's a fringe tale. Historians aren't sure if it's truth or embellishment, but you soak in its guitar string tension. Picture yourself in utter darkness, using only the feel of water to mold wood, every rib defying the cold to bend just so. In that moment, creativity feels like a sixth sense, guiding your hands when sight fails. The elder's tale fades, replaced by the steady hum of the wind. You sense that every kayak built in those early days carried not just flesh and sinew, but also a whispered hope that tomorrow might be gentler. And so the ancestry of Inuit kayaking emerges not from a single inventor but from a long chain of small adaptations, each paddler learning from his elders, each repair a lesson in resilience. The boats became extensions of the people. When you see a kayak draped in a flickering lantern glow at the water's edge, you're witnessing not only a vessel but a narrative of survival written in animal hide. You shift your weight, noticing crisscross patterns in the ice beneath your toes, subtle fractures that signal an approaching lead. Ahead, water gleams black between frozen banks, and you imagine sliding a primitive kayak into that opening. You sense the hushed excitement of biting into something unknown, of trusting a vessel built from a patchwork of available resources. Each paddle stroke would trace centuries of knowledge, every breath synced with ancestral rhythms. You turn back to the present. The same ice stretches before you, as silent now as it was then. A lone seagull croaks overhead, a reminder that life persists even in the frigid void. You can almost hear the faint hum of ancient dialect echoing across space and time, reminding you that while the materials have changed, alder wood replaced by modern composites, synthetic threads replacing sinew, the essence of Inuit ingenuity remains as alive as the swells beneath the ice. As you pivot to continue your westward glide, the memory of those early artisans glows warm in your mind. You feel tethered to a lineage that made beauty out of necessity, that saw potential in the driftwood others overlooked. You realize that every crackling frost and each hush of wind isn't just ambient noise, it's a curriculum in listening to ice, wind, and water until you know them better than yourself. So you lift a hand, tracing imaginary rivets along a hull that no longer exists, nodding your respect to a time when creation was as vital as breath. The Arctic sun lifts, spilling a glow of promise over snow ribs, and you whisper a quiet vow to paddle onward, honoring the ancestral echoes that still carry forward in every stroke. You press forward now, snowflakes brushing your lashes like whispers from another time, following the path where invention has turned to routine. The kayak, no longer a crude shell of stitched hide and driftwood, evolves with every mile you float, and so do you. You're entering a period when Inuit craftsmanship becomes art, and the kayak turns into more than a survival tool. It becomes a symbol of knowledge passed from father to son and to niece, of balance between sea and human, of silence gliding across open water, where a single splash could spook dinner back into the depths. The snow crunch beneath your boots fades as your kayak slides off its sled frame and into the water. A fresh hull, tightly sealed, cradles your weight like an extension of your body. You've memorized its every bend. It's narrow, with a slight upward tilt at the bow, just enough to skim over small waves without digging in. You sit low in the cockpit, your knees gently pressing against the inside walls. The balance feels precarious but deliberate, and you paddle as if threading a needle, every stroke careful not to tip the world sideways. This is the era of classical kayak design, around the 1600s, though nobody's setting dates by European calendars out here. You float alongside a hunter whose clothing is stitched from seal and caribou, carefully tailored for waterproofing. He wears a tunic. A tunic-like parka with a drawstring that cinches tightly around the cockpit coaming. Water can't enter. Cold wind can't seep through. The kayak becomes a cocoon of survival, and you admire the ingenuity of this dry suit before dry suits. You drift past 3 vessels pulled up onto the shore, each a slightly different shape, each tuned to its owner's build and style. One is long and narrow, made for speed and open water. Another is shorter, stockier, more stable, a kayak for nearshore hunting, good for maneuvering in cluttered ice. The last has a tiny indentation along the hull, a strange little curve that makes you pause. It's subtle, but you realize it must affect how the water flows around it. It's not an error, it's a fingerprint. Kayaks weren't mass-produced. They were custom-fit to the paddler, and if that paddler had a slightly lopsided stroke or favored the left shoulder, well, the boat would mirror that bias. Inuit builders didn't use blueprints. They didn't measure. They felt. They used the human body as a template. The kayak's length was typically 3 times the height of its paddler, the width, the same as the hips plus a hand's breadth on either side. Want to measure the cockpit? Spread your knees as you would when seated. That's your opening. Want to know where the balance point lies? Sit on a plank and rock until you stop tipping over. Congratulations, you've located the centerline. You try to imagine today's engineers working like this, without rulers, relying on instinct and muscle memory. No CD software. Just bodies, water, wood, and wind. It's during this golden age of kayak craft that the Greenland-style kayak emerges, a fact that weaves neatly into the mainstream. These boats, razor-thin and almost serpentine, were built for stealth. The prow sliced water silently. A seal wouldn't even blink before it was too late. Greenland kayaks could roll with ease, and hunters practiced self-righting techniques like kajasarnik, rolling exercises not for fun, but survival. You lean back now, imagining your body upside down beneath the waves, torso pressed against bone and hide, fingers tracing along the hull. With a flick of hips and a sweep of the paddle, you roll upright again, gasping the first breath of precious air. You smile at the memory of a fringe tidbit someone whispered to you at a northern camp, that some hunters trained for weeks inside their kayaks without touching water, sitting inside the frame in the snow. Arms bound, mentally rehearsing the feel of each roll until their body moved instinctively. Like Arctic yoga meets underwater ballet. They believed mastery started in the mind. You wonder if that's true. Maybe it's not even about the water. Maybe it's about knowing that you can remain calm when everything flips upside down. And so, you watch as hunters slip into the water with barely a ripple, their kayaks nearly invisible. You see one approach a basking seal, gliding silently. A quick exhale. A perfectly thrown harpoon, launched from an oar sack. A small handheld throwing board that looks like a paddle but functions like an arm extension. The strike is precise. The seal dives, but a float bag made from an inflated seal bladder bobs after it, keeping track of its location. It's a system so simple it's genius. You smile again. Of course they figured this out. Why chase your meal when you can track it calmly, paddle over with dignity, and thank it before bringing it home? There's elegance in this lifestyle. It's not primitive. It's optimized. You marvel at how these Arctic engineers could sense wind patterns, read tide lines, and diagnose hull damage with a glance. You touch the edge of your kayak where a sinew has frayed and think of the quiet, methodical repairs made under oil lamp glow, with bone needles and slow hands. There was no rush. The sea didn't care for your schedule. You passed by a cluster of kayaks hauled onto rocks, propped up like great skeletons drying in the sun. Their skins are stretched tight over wooden ribs, each frame lashed with sealskin thongs that creak softly in the wind. You lean in, running your fingers over the junction where rib meets gunnel. No nails. No glue. Just tension, friction, and ancient design. Each component holds the others in check, and if one part fails, the whole vessel groans in protest. It's the kind of harmony that makes you question modern life. Would your phone still work if you removed one app? Would your office chair hold you if one bolt came loose? The kayaks here aren't just built, they're maintained constantly. After every paddle, a hunter checks for wear. Hide needs to be oiled regularly to prevent cracking in the cold. Salt water is wiped clean with snow. Damaged frames are patched with bone, with driftwood, even with small pieces of baleen if needed. Nothing is wasted. Even the sea seems to know that. And as you rest your paddle across your lap, you remember what an elder once told you with a smirk. A good kayak won't love you back, but it also won't let you die stupid. That's the deal. These boats are faithful, but not forgiving. Treat them well, and they'll carry you safely over frozen seas. Treat them poorly, and you're the evening gossip among seabirds. You coast now, past another hunter wearing snow goggles carved from bone, the slits narrowing his view but protecting his eyes. The kayak beneath him rocks with the waves as he adjusts a line on his harpooned float. His motions are slow, deliberate. He's not rushing. He's observing. He's reading the ice, noting where seals breathe and currents turn. And you? You realize you're reading too, not just the landscape, but the story inscribed into these vessels, the human story. Because every kayak you pass carries more than a person. It carries years of practice, generations of wisdom, and whispers from old hands that knew what kind of driftwood bent best without splintering. You float forward. Your own vessel now feeling like part of that lineage. And for a moment you let yourself feel proud, not just to float, but to understand. The light begins to shift again. That soft Arctic glow turns pewter, brushing the sea in velvet gray. And in the distance, the coastline crumbles into fog, suggesting more to come. You shift your weight, paddle dipping once, twice, and your kayak moves like it remembers every place it's ever been. Your kayak rocks gently now, the water smooth as slate beneath you, broken only by the slow rhythm of your paddle strokes. You're beginning to understand this place not just as an environment, but as a mood, a constant low hum of ice, salt, wind, and memory. Ahead lies the vast openness of the hunting sea. This is where technique meets instinct, and instinct meets the patience of someone who can sit for hours without moving a muscle. Because here, survival is less about athleticism and more about being still. You adjust your grip on the paddle, carved from a single piece of driftwood, narrow-bladed and silent. The double-bladed Greenland paddle slices through the water with no splash. Just a soft whisper like brushing silk across stone. You're starting to realize that nothing about this experience is about rushing. The water isn't a racetrack. It's a mirror. And today, it's reflecting what it takes to hunt in a world made of ice and breath. Far ahead, a dark speck breaks the surface. Then another. You narrow your eyes. Seals, basking, breathing, then vanishing again. They are alert, twitchy, and not exactly thrilled by the presence of potential predators in floating coffins. You slow down. Quiet becomes your weapon now. The kayak, impossibly narrow, becomes your shadow. You lean slightly into the strokes, using only your core, making tiny corrections with your knees and hips. You're not even paddling as much as you are thinking your way forward. You remember what you were told: don't look directly at the seal. Look just off to the side. Approach diagonally. Stop moving long before you get close. Let the sea do the drifting. Let time do the convincing. You glide. The world narrows. Even your thoughts shrink. One breath. One flick of the wrist. One sound, and the seal will vanish. This kind of hunting doesn't make for epic Hollywood chase scenes. It's the opposite. It's about the long, cold wait. You think of the stories whispered at night by hunters with leathered cheeks and slow voices. Stories of lying in the same spot for an entire afternoon, motionless, watching ice shift and seals blink. The trick, they said, wasn't in throwing the harpoon. It was in not throwing it until the exact second everything aligned. You're tempted to exhale deeply, but you don't. You barely breathe. Instead, you listen to the sea under you, like holding a glass to a wall. Eavesdropping on ancient conversations. The kayak creaks softly. Your bones ache from stillness. And yet, in this strange tension there's peace, then a whisper of movement from the corner of your eye. A seal has surfaced just 20 yards off your bow, nostrils flaring, eyes wide and glistening. You don't move. You wait. It dives again, gone in an instant. But you know it's watching. This is the game. The harpoon beside you is a thing of elegance. A shaft of bone or driftwood, its tip carved from polished ivory or antler, lashed on with sinew. It's barbed, but not for cruelty, just enough to hold once it strikes. Attached is a float made from a seal bladder, inflated and cured. It bobs gently on the deck, eager to fulfill its role. You hold the Norse sack in your hand, a throwing stick, shaped to fit your palm perfectly. With it, you can launch the harpoon straighter and farther than with bare hand alone. This isn't brute strength, it's technique. The Norsack adds leverage, lets you stay low in the kayak, minimizes movement. Think catapult, but Inuit. And now, one mainstream fact surges through your mind. By the 18th century, European explorers would be utterly fascinated, and slightly terrified, by the precision and grace of Inuit seal hunters. William Edward Parry, an Arctic navigator, once watched a hunter strike a moving seal from a kayak with a harpoon and wrote that the man could probably have won medals if there had been a Royal Olympic kayaking while seal hunting division. As your own kayak sways in the cold silence, you begin to feel the rhythm of the hunt, the circling, the waiting, the patience like a deep current below your ribs. This isn't a test of your weapon. It's a test of your willingness to let time stretch out like the horizon. Until you're no longer a threat, just another part of the floating seascape. Suddenly, a strange image flashes in your mind, one from a story barely anyone repeats now. A fringed tale, half legend, half embarrassing anecdote. A man who trained so hard for stealth that he forgot to eat for 2 days straight. He finally threw his harpoon, struck a seal, and promptly passed out from hunger right there in the kayak. When his family found him the next morning, the seal was still tethered to the float bag, bobbing patiently nearby like it had waited just to be polite. No one knows if it's true, but you chuckle softly anyway. Seems like something the sea would allow, if only for the irony. You float again now, the seal long gone, but the lesson intact. Hunting isn't always about the catch. Sometimes it's about the practice, the calibration, the becoming. You glide past another kayak now, its hunter in mid-paddle, his movements slow, his back curved in that practiced way that keeps the body warm and the core strong. His harpoon rests beside him, his float bag slightly deflated, perhaps a failed strike earlier in the day. He nods to you, and you nod back, as if to say, yes. I see you out here. I feel the stillness too. As you continue, the coastline rises beside you, crusted with salt and thyme. There are crevices where seal pups might hide, small caves that echo with the slap of water. You imagine hauling a successful catch ashore, dragging the seal up by rope, thanking it silently, gutting it with tools carved from the very bones of past hunts. There's no triumph in the act, just gratitude. The kayak, now heavier from hours of paddling, still holds you tight. Your body has stiffened in the cold, but your mind drifts lightly, soothed by the repetition of the hunt, even if you didn't strike anything today. the silence has value too. The floating, the watching, the waiting, it's all part of the long Arctic conversation between humans and water. And as the sun dips closer to the horizon, you recall that most Inuit hunters didn't operate solo forever. They shared stories in groups, debriefed in low whispers by firelight, compared seal tracks, traded harpoon tips. The kayak might be solitary by nature, but the life around it was always shared. You think back to your own kayak now, what stories it might carry. How many missed throws? How many perfect ones? How many quiet days when the sea gave only silence? You paddle once more, then let your arms rest. The kayak drifts, rocking slightly. Somewhere below, a seal surfaces unseen, breathes, then disappears again. The hunt continues, just without you this time. And that's okay. The air thickens with evening mist, soft and heavy like a wool blanket thrown over the sea. You paddle slower now, your arms not from exhaustion but out of respect. This part of the coast demands stillness. The hunting sea is behind you for now. Ahead lies ice. Not the broken slush of spring melt, but the looming, creaking slabs of pack ice and floes, drifting like ghost cities across the Arctic's frigid heart. You're entering a new domain, where the kayak must weave and duck and squeeze through shifting corridors. This is the high-stakes ballet of ice navigation. The edges of the floes are unpredictable, smooth in one spot, jagged the next. You've learned to read them not with your eyes, but with your ears. A deep groan? The flow is expanding. A series of sharp cracks? Ice under tension. When the sound grows soft, like slow breathing, it's safer. For now. You slip between two flows, your paddle held horizontally to avoid knocking the sides. The kayak's flexibility makes it perfect for this environment. It bends just enough to absorb gentle pressure, but not so much that it sacrifices speed. Historians still debate just how often Inuit hunters ventured into the most treacherous ice fields, and whether it was desperation, seasonal necessity, or just sheer expertise that led them into labyrinths no outsider dared follow. What's certain is that they could read the ice like a map. Not a flat one, no. A living one, where wind, current, and pressure change the routes daily, sometimes hourly. You lean slightly forward and drift under a low arch of ice, its underside rippled with ancient layers. You reach out, touch it briefly, cold, pitted, and hard as old teeth. It's a ceiling, a portal, maybe even a warning. On the far side, the light changes, bouncing blue against the water like liquid glacier. The kayak slides through without protest, as though it, too, has been here before. In these tight passages, the traditional Inuit kayak shines brightest. It's low profile, meaning the wind doesn't shove you around. Its hull is narrow enough to thread even the narrowest gaps. And best of all, it rides low in the water, so if a flow should unexpectedly tilt or shift, you don't capsize so much as melt into the movement. You stop paddling and let the current pull you forward. Above you, a seal hauls itself out onto the ice, peering down with that familiar, skeptical expression, part wary, part unimpressed. You've seen that face before. It's the look someone gives you at the grocery store when your cart blocks the aisle. Another stroke. The ice around you groans again. This time more urgently. It's shifting. You pull to the right, wedge the kayak into a channel just as two floes grind against each other behind you. The noise is like thunder pressed into a narrow room. You hold your breath. The kayak rocks slightly but holds. Another narrow escape. Later, you rest against a small burgee bit, a chunk of ancient glacier, bobbing like a retired giant. These fragments are colder, denser, and often bluer than sea ice. Some even fizz softly in the sun, releasing long-trapped air bubbles from millennia ago. You lean in and listen. Yes, there it is. Tiny sighs from a time before your ancestors built the first kayak. Air from another earth, drifting into yours. You sip from a sealskin water pouch and snack on dried char, tough, salty, oddly satisfying. Your hands are stiff with cold, but you rub them together and keep going. It's not bravery. It's just what the day demands. A moment of calm returns. You paddle on through a wider corridor now, ice floes drifting on either side like ships in dry dock. It's strangely beautiful. A white and blue canyon of floating architecture. The water between them is black, mirror still. You glance down and see your reflection, a long silhouette, paddle raised. You look like a blade cutting across the skin of the earth. Somewhere in this quiet, a curious fact floats into your memory. Certain flows become seasonal highways for Arctic foxes. Yes, foxes. They hop between flows in late winter, scavenging seal scraps and trailing polar bears from a safe distance. Once, it's said, a fox was spotted riding a floe for nearly 30 miles before hopping ashore and trotting off like it hadn't just drifted across a small sea. You wonder if a fox has followed your kayak before. Maybe it's watching now, from a ledge above, confused and mildly disappointed you didn't bring snacks. Time passes slowly here. The ice does not rush. You don't either. The kayak demands you match its pace, which in turn matches the sea, which in turn follows the winds, which follow the stars. It's a long chain of obedience, and you've given in completely. You pass an old seal haul-out spot, dark streaks on the ice marking where bodies once basked. Nothing now but snow and a few scattered feathers. You think of the kayakers who've passed this way before. How many? Dozens? Hundreds over centuries? No graffiti. No markers. Just the memory of their wake, long dissolved, long honored. The kayak bumps gently into a flow, and you back paddle, shifting direction. Here comes another narrow gap, and you squeeze through, shoulder blades tensing as if that'll help. The boat squeaks past, just enough room. This is where bulkier vessels would freeze in place. Where ships get stuck and splintered. But not you. You're sleek. You're narrow. You're built for this dance. Some Inuit tales say that certain ice corridors are alive, that they whisper warnings if you know how to listen. You strain your ears. A crack, a sigh, a ripple. Is that a warning or just old ice releasing old tension? Hard to say. But you don't linger. You paddle on, giving the creaking flows a respectful berth, like you're sidestepping a sleeping elder in the dark. Finally, a clearing. Open water again. You breathe deeply, stretch your spine. The kayak glides easily now, relieved to be free. You glance over your shoulder and see the ice passage narrowing behind you, the way a secret closes once it's been used. Like the sea is tucking away a chapter just for you. Ahead, the coastline returns, dark and low, mottled with rock and snow. You head for it slowly, letting the paddle rest across your lap. The muscles in your shoulders hum quietly. The kayak rocks with soft rhythm, whispering, "We made it." Again. And though you've seen no other humans for hours, you feel accompanied. By hunters past, by kayaks lost to the sea, by seals, and even by foxes on drifting islands of ice. The Arctic doesn't offer solitude. It offers company in unexpected forms. You glide toward the coast again, drawn to the dark shapes rising from the water like tired bones. These aren't just any stones. These are the remains of old campsites, hunting stations, and food caches. You beach the kayak gently on a patch of gritty snow and step out, your feet numb but practiced. The land welcomes you with silence, not a passive kind, but the sort that watches and remembers. All around, the terrain is wind-scoured and brittle, painted in grays and whites, dotted with driftwood ribs and bone fragments half buried in permafrost. You wander past a circle of stones, clearly once a tent ring, used to hold down the edges of a skin shelter. Inside the ring, the ground is softer, sunken slightly, as if it still holds the body heat of someone long gone. This is your introduction to the shore camp. When you couldn't stay on the move, or didn't want to, you built low, small, and smart. Shelters made from seal or caribou hides, stretched over driftwood or whalebone frames. Some Inuit groups dug snow pits and laid hides over top, crafting cozy dens that looked like nothing from a distance but were warm as toast inside. You pause, imagining the hum of quiet conversation within one, the soft clink of bone tools being sharpened, the hiss of meat sizzling on a soapstone slab. You crouched beside an ancient food cache, raised on stone legs to keep it away from scavengers. Inside would have been dried seal, fish, blubber wrapped in skins, maybe even a treat or two, berries mashed with fat into a dense energy paste. Today, it's empty, the wind whistling through the gaps. But you can still smell it faintly, grease and thyme. You crouched beside an ancient food cache, raised on stone legs to keep it away from scavengers. Inside would have been dried seal, fish, blubber wrapped in skins, maybe even a treat or two, berries mashed with fat into a dense energy paste. Today, it's empty, the wind whistling through the gaps. But you can still smell it faintly, grease and thyme. You warm your hands on a flat rock, soaking in the weak Arctic sun. This was never a land of waste. Every part of the animal was used. Sinew became thread. Bones became needles, spear points, sled runners. Blubber lit the lamps. Even the flippers might be cooked down into something chewy. You recall someone once saying, if it moved, we cooked it. If it didn't, we made a tool out of it. One quirky tidbit drifts to mind, the kind that makes you chuckle. There's a recorded case of a man trading away all of his beautifully made tools in exchange for a particularly soft and well-tanned pair of caribou hide pants. Priorities, you suppose? Cold weather changes the value of things. You head to a nearby overhang, where snow has drifted into soft curves. It looks untouched, but you know better. Under here, an Inuit hunter may have cached a kayak or extra supplies. They'd often leave backup gear hidden along familiar routes, never trusting the sea or sky to behave. It was like hiding spare change under your mattress. Only here, it was an extra paddle and some jerky stashed under a frozen ledge. You kneel by the edge of the snow and brush away a layer, half expecting to find something. You don't. But the action feels right. The sea is about movement, but the shore, that's where memories are buried. Overhead, gulls circle, their cries sharp against the vast silence. You pick your way along the shoreline, feet crunching over ice-blasted gravel. Ahead, a ring of standing stones juts from a rise. You approach slowly, reverently. These aren't just tent rings. This might be a grave site. You keep your distance. Not out of fear, but out of etiquette. The land doesn't forget. You pass a long groove in the ground, a Kayak trail, etched by the repeated dragging of kayaks from sea to shelter. It's barely visible, but once you spot it, you can't unsee it. A path of persistence, worn into the very bones of the earth. You kneel again, running your hand along a piece of driftwood stuck upright in the soil. Maybe it was once a marker. Maybe just a forgotten part of a rack or frame. Either way, it survived storms you couldn't imagine. You nod at it, a silent thank you to everything that's endured out here longer than you ever could. Then, as you rest against a large rock, the wind shifts, and you hear something strange. Not quite a voice. More like a low moan, carried across the land. You stiffen, alert. But no, it's not a ghost. It's a trick of wind through a crack in the stone. Or maybe it is a ghost, just not the kind that bothers you. This land is full of echoes, after all. You begin gathering stones, almost automatically. Not to build anything this time, just to feel them. They're rounded. Scored by glaciers, old enough to have seen the birth of kayak culture. You stack a few. One on top of another. A tiny cairn. No purpose but to mark that you were here. That someone passed through. That not everything washes away. The sun dips lower, brushing gold onto the snow. You sip again from your water pouch, and chew the last of your dried meat. You could light a lamp, maybe even start a small fire with the precious twigs and moss you've gathered. But you don't. The cold is part of the experience. Not hostile, just honest. This is what Inuit camps were made to be, not interruptions in the journey, but part of the rhythm. Paddle. Land. Rest. Repair. Listen. Repeat. The camp is never permanent, because the sea is never finished. As you lie back on the cold rock and stare up at the slowly dimming sky, you realize the shore is not a break from the journey. It is the journey, just in a different tempo. The land tells stories the sea can't. You imagine crawling into a low, hide-covered shelter, the smell of blubber lamps and smoked fish curling into your nose. A soft, fur-lined sleep robe. Maybe a short song hummed before sleep. Maybe nothing at all. Just the quiet. Just the knowledge that today you survived. And that was enough. You smile faintly, watching your breath cloud above you. The kayak waits by the waterline. Your companion. Your skeleton boat. And tomorrow, you'll slip back into it, returning to the world where paddles replace footsteps, and time stretches out like frost across stone. For now, the shore holds you. The morning unfolds without drama, just the gentle hush of snowflakes spiraling onto your sleeping roll. You sit up slowly, joints stiff from a night on stone, but your mind alert, soothed by the steadiness of the cold. The kayak lies where you left it, angled against the shore like a resting beast. You stretch, shake off the frost, and slide it back into the water. Today, you'll trace a stretch of coastline carved by glaciers, patrolled by narwhals, and storied with generations of hunting routes. As you paddle, the horizon pulses with shifting light. The sky's dim blue is punctuated with streaks of peach and silver. It's the kind of morning that would look stunning on Instagram if you weren't in a place where cell phones freeze before they boot up. You chuckle softly and dip the paddle again. The rhythm returns. This stretch of sea was once the equivalent of a coastal highway for Inuit hunters. Routes wound past known seal holes, past narwhal gathering spots, past hidden pockets of fresh water. The kayak wasn't just a vessel. It was your bus, your delivery van, your long-distance companion with whom you shared more conversations, silent though they were, than you ever did with humans. In your mind, you visualized the shoreline from above, snow-streaked cliffs, low tundra plains, pockets of icy inlets where fish dart beneath glassy surfaces. You trace these paths with your paddle now, knowing that even in this vastness, nothing about the route is random. Every cove is a memory. Every outcrop might be the place where someone once harpooned a seal, mended a sled, or warmed their hands over a shallow lamp flame. Up ahead, a series of dark shapes breach the surface. At first, you think it's rocks. But then they move, exhaling soft plumes of mist. Narwhals. A small pod, their backs breaking water in perfect, sleepy rhythm. You halt, gliding silently, not wanting to startle them. One surfaces closer than expected, its spiral tusk piercing the air like a unicorn's horn dipped in frost. You hold your breath. There's something about narwhals that feels made up, like a children's story left behind in the wrong world. But here they are. Real, powerful, and oddly elegant. You remember hearing how Inuit hunters once approached narwhals silently in kayaks, matching their rhythm stroke for stroke. The tusks, by the way, weren't just trophies. Some were used as tools, even traded with southern groups who saw them as magical objects. You pass slowly, the pod undisturbed, and continue along the route. Not every stretch is so magical. Some are brutally repetitive, just white and wind and the dull ache of your thighs in the cockpit. But even the monotony becomes part of the hypnosis. You count paddle strokes. 1, 2, breathe. 1, 2, shift your weight. It's a cold meditation. Your stomach rumbles. Time to eat. You pull in toward a low gravel bar just barely above the waterline. It's shaped like a finger, pointing inland. You haul the kayak up and sit back on your heels. The view is expansive, ice, cloud, sea, sky, and the occasional bird flitting like punctuation across the otherwise blank page. Lunch is nothing glamorous. More dried char, a piece of frozen bannock, and some whale blubber that you chew like bubblegum. You're not here for the cuisine. Though you do recall a strange historical tidbit. In the 19th century, A European explorer reported seeing an Inuit woman boil her mittens in a soup of seal broth, not to eat the mittens but to clean them and soften the soup flavor with the lingering oils from the hide. Dual-purpose dining. Fed and fractionally warmer, you slide the kayak back into the sea. The wind has picked up now, a steady breath from the north that presses your hood against your ears. The kayak doesn't complain. It leans into the wind like it's used to the bullying. Which, frankly, it is. The design of your craft, you're reminded, isn't random. It's tailored, literally, to your body. Traditional Inuit kayaks were custom fit. You'd sit in a frame made from driftwood or bone, and the measurements would be taken around you. Then, the skin covering, usually seal or sometimes caribou, would be stretched over the frame, sewn tight, and waterproofed with fat. The result was a boat that fit like clothing. In fact, the word kayak roughly translates to hunter's garment. You paddle on, the wind now a companion rather than a hindrance. You spot a break in the cliffs ahead, a hidden cove where fresh water trickles down from some snow-fed stream. It's narrow, almost invisible unless you already knew it was there. You steer into it with the quiet confidence of someone retracing steps worn deep into the subconscious of this land. Inside, the water is mirror smooth. The echo of your paddle taps off the stone walls, soft and melodic. You pass a shallow shelf where flat stones rise just beneath the surface, ideal for cleaning gear, or drying fish if the sun's angle cooperates. You imagine someone once sitting here, sewing a tear in their kayak skin, humming a low tune, the kind that doesn't need lyrics to carry meaning. You take a break. Not out of fatigue, but because this place asks for stillness. You rest the paddle across your lap and close your eyes. You hear water dripping from a ledge, a raven cawing somewhere above, the distant crunch of ice along the open sea. There's no drama. No climax. Just being. Which, in the Arctic, is achievement enough. Eventually, you turn the kayak around and push back into the main channel. The coastline continues. More inlets, more forgotten shelters, more stories stitched into cliffs and ice. You wonder who else has paddled this same stretch. Hundreds of years ago, was someone else counting paddle strokes the same way? Whispering to their kayak like it was a friend? Watching narwhals breach while chewing on half-frozen meat? Probably. Because in a place this big, the smallest rituals are what keep you human. The sun is sagging now, slanting sideways across the water, gilding every ripple in gold. You make for a high, flat beach where the stones are smoother and the wind breaks. The kayak slides up one final time today. You step out, stretch your legs, and pat the bow. Good boat. Good friend. Tomorrow, the route continues. But for now, the fireless camp awaits. Another night under borrowed stars. The light has faded now, a pale memory smeared across the clouds like an afterthought. You're back on land, crouched behind a low ridge that offers a whisper of shelter from the breeze. The kayak rests nearby, half covered in snow, like it's tucking itself in for the night. You sit still, letting your breath frost the air, your hands folded into your sleeves. Tonight, your thoughts drift not to food or navigation or sea creatures with tusks, but to the kayak itself, how it's made, and how every piece matters. You lean back and glance at it, this long, narrow companion. The curves are subtle, almost shy. No flashy colors or logos. Just a shape that glides because it was born to glide. Inuit kayak construction wasn't just carpentry. It was bone-deep knowledge passed between generations. A kayak wasn't something you just had, it was something you were part of. A wearable craft. A second skin. The frame, your kayak skeleton, would usually be built from driftwood, since actual trees are famously scarce in the Arctic. In some cases, even whalebone was used when wood couldn't be found. You try to picture it, someone hauling a twisted log onto the beach, shaving and shaping it into ribs and gunnels, fastening them not with nails, but with sinew lashings, tough, flexible, quiet. Like building a musical instrument that also floats and doesn't kill you. You reach down and pick up a piece of sinew you'd been drying earlier. twisting it between your fingers. It's tough and fibrous, pulled from a caribou leg and soaked, scraped, and stretched until it became thread stronger than anything you'd find in a suburban sewing kit. No metal tools necessary, just an intimate relationship with biology, weather, and ingenuity. The skin stretched over the frame, usually made from sealskin, was sewn tight using curved needles crafted from bone. The seams had to be perfect. A single leak could spell disaster. So the women, yes, mostly women, who sewed the skins were as vital to kayak travel as the hunters themselves. It wasn't just craftsmanship. It was survival couture. Fashion with a very wet, very cold runway. As you run a hand along the deck lines, you remember something quirky. Some kayaks had tiny charms or amulets tied into their lashings, scraps of fur, carved figures, even a bird's claw. Not just for show, but for protection. Like travel insurance, only with a lot more personality. You rise slowly, brushing off snow, and inspect the seams. Yours is tight. No leaks. You did good. Your fingers trail over the edges of the cockpit, called the coaming, a snug rim made to hold your jacket in place and keep water out. It's shaped like an embrace, really. The tulik, that ingenious waterproof parka with a built-in skirt, would seal you into the kayak so completely that you and the boat were indistinguishable from the ocean's perspective. Just one long, silent shadow. Back when whales were still hunted from kayaks. And yes, that happened. This watertight connection mattered immensely. A wave breaking over your deck wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an invitation for hypothermia. So yes, a cozy sealskin hoodie that also sealed your waist to your boat. That was high Arctic fashion. You think about the paddle next, your double-bladed staff of life. Inuit paddles weren't clunky or heavy. They were long, narrow, and designed for efficiency. You'd rarely see someone paddling with dramatic, high strokes. Instead, the motion was smooth, almost secretive. Each stroke sliced the water rather than slapped it. Because when you're hunting, splashing is basically a dinner bell for seals. Hey, something clumsy is coming! It's all subtlety. The entire kayak is built for stealth. No sharp edges. No noisy joints. Even the lashings hum rather than creak. You imagine slipping silently into a hunting spot, eyes scanning for the barely there puff of breath from a seal's blowhole. And when that puff appears, quiet precision is everything. No time for adjusting or fumbling. The kayak has to become invisible, both in the water and in your mind. And yes, historians still debate whether the earliest kayaks were entirely Inuit innovations or if their designs evolved in tandem with similar Arctic watercraft used by other indigenous groups like the Yupik or Aleut peoples. The lines blur when everyone's been refining survival in the same brutal environment. What's clear, though, is that the Inuit made the kayak a personal extension, something not just paddled but inhabited. As you walk around the boat now, your steps crunch lightly in the snow. You admire the deck rigging, thin lines made from rawhide that let you stow gear, tie down harpoons, or lash down a seal you've just hunted. Function first, always. Nothing wasted. If there's room for flair, it's in the way the knots are tied, the curve of the blade, the finesse in the stitching. You sit down again, this time just to watch the snow settle on your boots. You feel calm. Not because you're isolated, but because everything around you has a purpose. The kayak is a reminder that elegance lives in necessity. And that, in this world, style is defined by silence, balance, and survival. Somewhere behind you, a fox barks, short, sharp, then gone. You don't turn. You already know how the land speaks. You've learned to listen without reacting, to observe without disturbing. Just like your kayak does. It moves but doesn't intrude. It travels without leaving a wake in memory. Before the cold wraps too tightly around your shoulders, you cover the kayak with a light skin tarp. You whisper to it, something in a language that's more sound than word. A thank you, maybe? Or just a bedtime story to the only thing out here that understands how to float between water and wind. You lie down beside it, curled in your furs, and let your breathing slow. The wind presses gently at your side, not cruel now, but companionable. As if it too respects the kayak's quiet craftsmanship. The snow deepens. The stars emerge. You dream of ribs and skins, sinew and driftwood. Of curved needles and bone thread. Of boats that wear you like a memory and hold your weight without complaint. And tomorrow, the kayak will rise again. You wake to silence. Not the absence of sound, exactly, but the kind of thick, muffled quiet that only deep Arctic snow can produce. It presses against your ears like wool. You sit up slowly, blinking at the pale haze. Overnight, a gentle snowfall has covered everything, your camp, your boots, your kayak. For a moment, it all looks like an untouched sculpture, a white dream suspended just long enough for you to wonder if you imagined it. The kayak is still there, of course. Loyal as ever, lying half buried with only its combing peeking above the blanket. You brush the snow away like you're unwrapping a gift. And in a way you are. Every morning out here feels like rediscovering something forgotten. Like the world hit reset, and you're the first human to ever rise and stretch and think, well, I guess we paddle again. Today's journey hugs the edge of an ice shelf. The sea is calmer here, protected by a thick white lip of frozen sea that stretches far into the distance. This shelf, you know, is seasonal, an old friend who arrives late, stays too long, and occasionally collapses with dramatic flair. It groans underfoot and creaks when you press your paddle against its edge. A reminder that not all solid-looking things are stable. Just like that folding chair you still regret trusting last summer. You launch carefully, nose first, sliding the kayak into a narrow lane of open water that threads between the shelf and a line of black rock. It's like paddling down a hallway, walls of snow and stone on either side, roofed by a sky that can't decide what shade of gray it wants to be. As you glide forward, your paddle lightly taps ice chunks that bob like puzzle pieces broken apart. These are growlers, smaller than icebergs but still heavy enough to ruin your day if you hit them head-on. You steer with care, tracing a lazy zigzag. Occasionally, a bubble trapped under the surface will burst with a soft glorp. It's the ocean's way of talking in its sleep. Once, in this very corridor of water, an Inuit hunter recounted losing his kayak to a wayward burgee bit. The impact cracked his frame just below the gunwale. He had to paddle to shore, drag the wreck onto the rocks, and repair it with a spare rib lashed into place using bootlace and frozen determination. According to legend, he then named that kayak Sealbreaker, and never let it out of his sight again. You smile. You've definitely named worse. Farther ahead, you come upon an ancient campsite, barely visible, just a ring of stones half swallowed by snow and time. But you recognize the shape instantly. It's the foundation of a karmak, a traditional semi-subterranean winter home made of stone and whale bone. Covered in skins and snow. During the colder months, when even the kayak had to rest, Inuit families would gather in these spaces, small, warm, and alive with flickering seal oil lamps. You drift closer to shore and hop out to investigate. The stones are cold and slick, but the space between them still whispers of firelight and laughter. You run your glove over a rounded edge, perhaps once part of a whale's rib, now moss-covered and forgotten. This was someone's living room. You half expect to find a carved spoon or a needle tucked in the rocks. Standing there, you remember a fringe theory you heard once, that certain karmak layouts were designed not just for warmth or structural integrity, but also to encourage specific airflow patterns, like Arctic feng shui. The placement of the entrance tunnel, the angle of the sleeping platform, none of it random. Every design decision doubled as both shelter logic and cultural ritual. You crouch down in the ring of stones and imagine it occupied. You see a woman scraping skins, a child gnawing a fish spine, a man carving something quietly by lamplight. Outside, the kayak would be turned upside down on a rack, drying, resting. Because everything rests sometimes, even the things built for movement. Back in your own moving world, you relaunch and continue. The path curves inland slightly, leading to a cluster of tide cracks, lines in the ice where the sea breathes in and out, leaving long, jagged scars. They're dangerous. Beautiful, but dangerous. The kind of thing that lures you in with aesthetic perfection, only to collapse under your foot. Like dating a glacier, you steer wide of the cracks, giving them a respectful berth. Overhead, a gull cries once, then vanishes. The clouds shift slightly, and for a moment, a shaft of light slices down onto the ice like a celestial spotlight. It falls on a lone Inuksuk standing sentinel on a nearby ridge. The Inuksuk, those stone markers built to resemble a person, are common out here. Guides. Warnings. Sometimes tributes. They were used to signal good hunting grounds, safe passages, or food caches. And sometimes they were just there to remind you, yes, someone else passed this way. You're not the first. You won't be the last. This land remembers. You paddle closer, just enough to see the weathering on its stones. Some archaeologists debate their age. Some were built decades ago. Others? Centuries. Historians still argue whether certain large Inuksuk functioned as ceremonial markers or hunting aids, or whether their purpose changed depending on who built them. Like ancient road signs reinterpreted by each generation. As you pause in front of the ridge, a gust of wind pulls a small snow devil across the ice, swirling and then vanishing. You take it as your cue to move on. The next few kilometers pass in a trance. Paddle, breathe, shift. The landscape blurs. Your thoughts settle. The kayak doesn't judge your silence. It carries you like it always does, smooth, steady, and loyal. Eventually, you find another soft curve in the shore where driftwood has collected, an accidental sculpture of tangled bleached logs and kelp strands. You slide in, pull the kayak onto the bank, and take a long breath. The cold smells clean here. Like old salt and younger snow, you crouch beside your kayak once more and run your fingers along the deck. It's soaked, slightly stiff from the freeze-thaw of the day. You gently rub some blubber fat into a seam, the same way others did for generations. No fanfare. Just maintenance. Respect. As the sky darkens into its long Arctic twilight, you prepare to camp again. No fire. No tent. Just the curve of your back against the earth, and the curve of your boat beside you. The kayak doesn't complain. And neither do you. Tonight, the moon rises silver and low, casting your shadow onto the snow. You and your kayak, side by side, two long shapes carved into the quiet. The moon is higher now, and the land has taken on that strange, blue quiet it wears in the hours when most things have given up trying to stay awake. But you're still alert in your stillness. The kayak lies beside you, resting, but your mind is gliding again, this time not across ice or open water, but through memories. And not all of them are yours. You reach out, touch the smooth hide stretched over the kayak's frame, and remember the old stories. Not the kind whispered to children before bed, though there are plenty of those, but the quieter ones, half remembered by elders, shared over frozen meat and snow-scraped firelight. The ones about how Inuit hunting by kayak wasn't just about skill, it was about learning to disappear. Imagine it, you, tucked low inside your boat, barely a ripple as you glide across a fjord. Not even the birds flinch. Your harpoon rests across the deck, its tip carved from antler or sharpened stone, sometimes even ancient meteoric iron that fell from the stars. Yes, really, fragments from the heavens, hammered into tips used to catch seals and narwhals. Inuit ingenuity never limited itself to earth, but there's more than gear here. You recall an old phrase an elder once used, Nalyakatagit, which loosely means those who understand one another. It referred to the bond between hunter and kayak, between paddler and the animals they hunted. Because you couldn't be an intruder out here. You had to be a participant. An animal among animals. Seen, but not feared. Present, but not disruptive. Hunting was always a quiet art. You'd watch a seal basking on an ice floe and paddle in slow, measured intervals. Stroke. Pause. Let the kayak drift. Stroke. Pause. Watch the body language. Tilt your head as the seal does. Match its rhythm. You weren't stalking, you were mimicking. And that's what made kayaks perfect. They didn't slap the water like larger boats. They whispered through it. No sails to flap. No oars to splash. Just you, your paddle, and a ghost's footprint in the water. Even the harpoon was designed with silence in mind. It wasn't just a stick with a point. It was a marvel of physics and patience. A long shaft with a detachable head tethered to a float, often made from a seal's inflated bladder. When it struck, the point stayed lodged while the shaft dropped away. The float dragged behind, slowing the animal. It was never about brute force. It was about clever design and understanding your target. Today, some historians still debate the origins of the toggling harpoon head. Was it invented in one burst of insight, or did it evolve slowly across regions and cultures, passed down and modified through use? The toggle design, so deceptively simple, allowed the harpoon to lodge beneath the skin and hold fast. It's used around the world even now, in different materials and with different names. But the Arctic may have seen it first. As you stare up at the moon, you picture the narwhal. Long, slender, graceful, and armed with a spiral tusk that looks like the unicorn's more practical cousin. Inuit hunters would track them for hours, using the kayak to move silently alongside, barely visible. A flash of tusk, a spray of mist, and then motion, tension. Release. It wasn't just about food. It was about tools, bones, sinews, and respect. The narwhal offered much, and the kayak allowed you to reach it without disrupting the rest of the sea's rhythm. A surgical strike by someone who understood the water as well as the creatures in it. You adjust your position, pulling your parka tighter, and notice the stars for the first time tonight. They don't twinkle out here. They burn. Hard and still. Like distant campfires from another tribe entirely. Somewhere out there in that vast, dark water of history, stories float that few will ever hear. Like the tale of the young paddler who once harpooned a beluga but capsized in the process. Rather than abandon the animal, or the kayak, he held fast to both, floating beside them for hours until the current carried all three ashore. When found, he simply said the kayak knew where to go. You'd believe it. Out here, the line between craft and spirit gets blurry. Not all hunting stories ended with triumph, of course. Some returned without meat. Some didn't return at all. A sudden calving of ice. A seal that vanished too quickly. A paddle that snapped just as the wind rose. These aren't tragedies. Not exactly. Just acknowledgments that the sea takes what it wants sometimes, and the kayak can only do so much. But what it can do is give you the best chance. Its quiet shape. Its practiced silence. Its agility. It becomes the difference between luck and preparation. Between drifting and navigating. Between guessing and knowing. You glance at your own harpoon, lashed neatly to the deck. The bindings are tight. The head is smooth and dark with age. You run your thumb along the shaft and feel the notches. Tiny markers etched over seasons, each one a memory. A missed strike here. A clean catch there. A seal that dived just before you released. Lessons carved in wood. Even your paddle tells a story. One side is slightly worn from the way your strokes favor the left. A bit of seal blood darkens the middle, old, now, but unmistakable. A stain of success. Or maybe gratitude. Your stomach grumbles faintly. The kind of ache that isn't urgent, just polite. You'll eat soon. Maybe jerky. Maybe something frozen and strange that defrosts slowly between your fingers. But for now, you're content. The wind lifts gently again, tracing your face like a memory. It smells faintly of salt and something ancient. Not decay, but age. The kind of air that once wrapped around glaciers and still remembers the pressure of wool mittens and harpoon ropes pulled taut. Tonight, the kayak dreams too. You're sure of it. It remembers the ripple of narwhals just beneath, the clean arc of a harpoon through the mist, the barely audible sigh of a paddler holding their breath just long enough, and tomorrow? You'll do it all again. By the time you stir again, morning is playing tricks with the light. It's not a sunrise exactly, just a gradual swapping of deep indigo for a pale gray that could easily pass for dusk if you weren't paying attention. Time doesn't operate normally out here. You glance at your watch, then ignore it. The kayak doesn't wear one, and yet it always knows when to go. Today's paddle takes you toward a region known for its erratic tides and narrow sea channels, places where water can race like a river, only to flatten out into eerie stillness an hour later. You pull your kayak down a gravel embankment still half frozen from the night, pushing it gently into the water, your boots slipping slightly on a patch of stubborn ice. One more laugh from the landscape at your expense. You begin with wide, slow strokes, the paddle slicing into water that's thicker here, as if reluctant to let go of its ice. A crust lingers along the surface, delicate as candy glass. You brush through it like a painter clearing old lines. The kayak responds like it always does, steady, directional, never in a rush. It respects the morning mood. Around the bend lies one of those narrow channels, framed by steep cliffs with a curtain of icicles clinging to their face. They hang like the teeth of a beast, except perfectly still. If you listen carefully, you can hear droplets falling, just a few, irregular, plinking off the rock and echoing like water clocks keeping ancient time. This channel, you recall, was known to the Inuit for both its danger and its bounty. A perfect ambush spot for marine mammals who use these corridors during migration. Seals, belugas, even the elusive bowhead whale have been spotted squeezing through this winding trench. But it was also a place where kayaks could be dashed against rocks if the tide turned too quickly. And so, you keep one eye on the current. It eddies now lazily, but you've seen that change in the space of a breath. You pass the remains of an old cairn built into a cliff crevice, its rocks blackened with age and lichen. It may have marked safe passage. Or a warning. Possibly both. It depends who built it and when. That's the thing about old signs. Like inherited advice, they're useful, but often lack a timestamp. Midway through the channel, you find what you're looking for. A resting seal hauled out on a flat cake of ice. Its body gleams like wet slate. It sees you. You see it. You pause. The kayak stops without complaint. You float. Just float. This is the kind of moment traditional hunters would wait hours for, drifting within range. Letting the animal adjust to their presence. To flinch too soon would send it diving. But to remain still, to be predictable, to blend with the water's rhythm. Sometimes that earned trust, or at least tolerance. You don't raise your harpoon today. You're not hunting. Just watching. The seal blinks slowly. There's no fear in its posture. Just curiosity. It stretches slightly, flippers twitching, then turns its head to listen. You wonder what it hears. Not you, probably. The kayak is quiet. Quieter than you'll ever be. Inuit hunters knew the value of this stillness. A skilled paddler could drift so close that a seal might not even notice until it was too late. And even then, it wasn't always fatal. Some stories tell of seals escaping with harpoons still lodged, only to be spotted again weeks later, scarred but alive. It wasn't considered shameful. Just part of the chase. An understanding between equals. Of course, you've heard other stories too. Like the time in Angakik, an Inuit spiritual healer, was said to have paddled across this very channel in the skin of a seal. Not metaphorically. Literally. Transformed. He glided silently past enemy camps, eavesdropped on rival hunters, then swam home again without being seen. A trick of shadows? A tall tale? Maybe. But if you squint hard enough at the fog that now starts to gather along the cliff edges, you could almost believe it. You keep moving. The seal watches, unmoving as you pass. No splash. No panic. Just quiet observation, the way two beings in the Arctic acknowledge each other when they both know noise gets you noticed. As you emerge from the narrow channel, the landscape shifts again. Open sea returns, dotted with low ice pans and distant bird calls. The soundscape here is minimal: wind combing over snow, wings slicing the air, the occasional creak of your paddle's shaft. And beneath it all, the kayak murmurs along the hull, a sound as soothing as it is easy to forget until it's gone. You pause to eat, if you can call gnawing on frozen fish eating. It's more like carving your way through a quiet promise of nutrition. Still, the salt hits just right, and the cold keeps it oddly refreshing. You sip meltwater from a skin pouch. It tastes faintly of smoke and leather. Everything out here seems to have a story in its flavor. You lean back slightly, letting the kayak drift on a lazy current, and remember another fringe theory you once read, that the design of the traditional kayak wasn't merely practical but encoded with spiritual geometry. The tapering bow represented forward motion and masculine energy, the gently rounded stern, receptiveness and calm. A symbolic journey built into the very shape you ride. Whether that's true or not, it's hard to deny the kayak's form feels inevitable. Like this is how water always meant to be touched. And now, as you close the day's paddle, you spot another figure in the distance. Another kayak? Could be. But it's too far to be sure. Just a low silhouette skimming the edge of visibility, trailing a faint wake in its path. You blink, and it's gone. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe a bird. Maybe nothing at all. But something in you relaxes a little more. The reminder that you're not alone, not just in body, but in spirit. Others have paddled this path. Some are still out there, gliding. Ghosts of bone-framed vessels and sealskin souls. You guide your kayak to a quiet shore, one wrapped in dry grass and purple lichens. It's an easy landing, soft, sloping, the kind your knees thank you for. You step out carefully, stretch, and begin your usual evening ritual. Dry the paddle. Flip the kayak. Sit close, lean back, and breathe. As the twilight deepens, the air grows heavier, but not cold. Just still. You rub your hands together, warmth spreading from friction and memory. You think again of the seal. Of the channel. Of the moment you both just floated there, present, accepting. The kayak sits by you, its hull mottled with salt streaks and tiny scratches, lines from the journey, signs of presence. Not battle scars. Just evidence of having been. The sky tonight stretches wider than it should. It's the kind of endless dome that presses down and lifts you up at the same time, smudged with starlight and cold clarity. You sit beside your kayak again, boots kicked off, toes curled in sealfur socks, and let the hush wrap itself around your shoulders like a warm blanket. The boat rests beside you, tilted gently on its side, half buried in snow drift. Your fingers trace the ridge of the paddle shaft out of habit. This one's older than it looks. Birch core, wrapped with sinew, sealed with animal fat long ago, still supple, somehow. Like the kayak, it doesn't shout for attention. It just works. And you wonder how many have made their own paddles this same way. With patience, yes, but also with the kind of reverence people usually reserve for heirlooms or musical instruments. As the cold deepens, your thoughts turn to community. Not yours, exactly, but those tight knots of people and tradition that kept kayaks in use for centuries. Because behind every solo paddler like you, there's a whole network of hands, mothers scraping hides, elders boiling sinew, children learning knots with clumsy fingers and watchful eyes. The kayak might carry one person, but it is, always, the result of many. You imagine a snow-covered village, tucked close to a bay, with frames stacked beside every dwelling. Spring is coming, and with it, open water. The builders are already at work, shaping driftwood ribs that washed ashore months ago. Each kayak must be measured to its paddler, a personal fit so intimate it feels more like tailoring than carpentry. Elbows to fingertips, shoulder width, hip span, everything precise. And once built, the frame is bent, flexed, encouraged into shape. It creaks like a creature waking up. Then comes the skin, often seal or walrus hide, softened by chewing, scraped thin and even, sewn watertight with bone needles and sinew thread. You think of someone stitching by firelight, every hole punched with care, every seam sealed with oil. These were craftspeople, sure, but also guardians of survival. Their work kept hunters dry, alive, and unseen. But even with this collective craftsmanship, the kayak remained deeply personal. Decorated, sometimes, subtly. A notch here, a burn mark there. Maybe a carved name that no outsider could read. Some designs whispered messages of clan, skill, or protection. Not flashy, just enough to remind the sea that this boat had purpose. And then, there's the family stories. You remember one, a grandfather who passed his kayak to his grandson with a quiet nod and no ceremony. The boat had seen storms, hunts, near-deaths, and births. It had scraped against whales and kissed seals clean through the mist. The grandson paddled it that same day, the weight of lineage under him. He said the seat felt like it remembered him. Like it never forgot. You run your hand over your own seat and wonder how many hours you've logged. How many memories it's held, some triumphant, some humiliating. Like that time the kayak flipped because you tried to eat dried fish with both hands while drifting. Or when you caught your first seal and cried, just a little, not out of guilt, but reverence. There's a strange intimacy in the way a kayak keeps your secrets. It knows when your strokes are uncertain. It recognizes the rhythm of your breath. It doesn't judge when you curse at a gust of wind or mutter apologies to a startled bird. It just glides. You lie back, the snow cold beneath you but not unfriendly. Overhead, the northern lights begin a slow pulse. Just green at first, then a smear of violet like bruised silk. You exhale, and the breath rises fast. Even the air moves carefully here. In the flickering sky, you picture the ceremonial side of kayaking, those rare rituals where boats were blessed, not with pomp, but with whispered words and careful gestures. Elders might trace lines along the hull with soot or spit, marking points of protection. There's one account of a paddler who carried a carved charm under his seat, a tiny bear, not for luck, but balance. His grandfather said it would remind the water who you are. And yet, not all kayaks were for hunting. Some were built for travel, for visiting distant settlements, or ferrying messages across yawning channels. You picture two paddlers, bundled to the eyebrows, one muttering updates about the caribou migration, while the other hands over a bundle of dried meat in trade. No words wasted. Just needs met. One quirky detail you recall: in some regions, Inuit women were forbidden to paddle kayaks. Their vessels of choice were umiaks, larger, open boats used for moving families and belongings. But even so, there are scattered oral histories of women slipping into their brothers' or husbands' kayaks in secret. Just to try. Just to feel the rush of gliding alone across ice-black water. The silence. The power. You think of those secret voyages and smile. Now, as the night settles deeper into its coldest hour, the air goes utterly still. No wind. No wildlife. Even the snowflakes fall without sound. You shift closer to the kayak and rest your head against its flank. It creaks slightly, would adjusting to the temperature drop. Or maybe just breathing. You wonder if old kayaks dream. If they remember paddlers long gone. Or hear echoes of old voices when the wind rushes just right. There's a kind of warmth in thinking so. One more paddle tomorrow. Maybe two. You're not tracking mileage anymore. Just moods. You'll follow the current as far as it takes you, then beach again. Eat. Rest. Repeat. You don't need a map. You've got the kayak. It's older than any GPS, wiser than most captains. And infinitely more patient. You close your eyes, the rhythm of your breath syncing once again with the slow, steady pattern the kayak seems to know by heart. You don't need to steer anymore. Not tonight. Not when the stars above trace routes older than any of you. The cold morning arrives soft, as if the Arctic itself is reluctant to break its slumber. You lift yourself into the cockpit, fingers stiff but steady, and push off from shore. The kayak rocks gently before settling into the water's rhythm, a delicate dance between your movements and the sea's subtle pulse. Today, you follow the currents toward a cluster of icebergs, their massive shapes looming white and blue against the pale sky. They drift lazily, almost dreamlike, their surfaces glinting with frost and cracks that hint at ancient fractures beneath the calm. These icebergs are more than frozen sculptures. They're moving archives, carrying stories of millennia trapped inside layers of compacted snow and ocean. You remember that some Inuit legends say the spirits of ancestors reside within the ice, watching over those who pass. Whether you believe it or not, you can feel the weight of their presence in the still air. As you paddle closer, you notice delicate patterns etched into the ice by wind and sun. Tiny caverns and arches invite you to explore, but you keep a respectful distance. You're here to observe, not to intrude. A sudden splash breaks the silence, a group of seals playfully chasing each other near the berg's base. Their sleek bodies shimmer in the cold water as they twist and turn with effortless grace. You watch, captivated by their joyful energy in such a harsh environment. The kayak glides smoothly between chunks of ice, your paddle strokes slow and deliberate. It's a balancing act, too fast, and you risk collision, too slow, and the cold seeps into your bones. The kayak's design reveals itself again, built for precision and speed, but also for patience. You think about how these journeys demand a kind of mindfulness that modern life often lacks. Here, every movement counts. Every breath is measured. The kayak is not just a vessel, it's an extension of your awareness, a partner in the dance with nature's elements. You pause to adjust your gloves, fingers numb but alert. The sun hovers low, casting long shadows and igniting the ice with an otherworldly glow. The world feels suspended between night and day, between past and present. In this liminal space, you recall a curious historical tidbit. Early European explorers were often baffled by the kayak's efficiency. They assumed it must be powered by some hidden mechanism or magic because it could cut through ice and waves with such ease. Of course, it was just the result of centuries of refinement and deep understanding of the Arctic's rhythms. But there's also a fringe idea that the kayak's shape was inspired by the body of the bearded seal, an animal central to Inuit life. The sleek curves, the narrow profile, the stealthy glide, all mirroring the seal's form in water. Whether myth or design, it's a poetic connection between hunter and hunted, craft and creature. As you navigate the iceberg field, you spot a dark shape beneath the water's surface, a shadow moving with purpose. A whale? You hold your breath and watch as a beluga surfaces briefly, its pale body contrasting with the deep blue below. It emits a series of clicks and whistles, a language as old as the sea itself. You smile to yourself, feeling the shared solitude of this moment. The kayak, the icebergs, the seals, the whale, all parts of a vast, interconnected world that spins on its own mysterious axis. The channel narrows again, guiding you toward a secluded cove where the water is glassy and still. You pull the kayak onto a small beach of smooth stones and step out, stretching muscles stiff from hours of paddling. The silence here is profound, interrupted only by the distant call of a raven. You sit on a rock, letting your hands warm in your lap, and reflect on the delicate balance of life in this frozen realm. The kayak journeys are more than physical travels, they are passages through time, memory, and spirit. Historians still debate the exact origins of the kayak, and how its evolution mirrors changes in Inuit culture and environment. Some argue it was born purely from necessity, while others believe it holds symbolic meanings lost to time. Either way, you know one thing for certain: the kayak is not just a tool, but a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. You pack up slowly, savoring the last moments of this quiet sanctuary before pushing back into the chilly water. The sun dips lower, and you set your course for home, guided by the fading light and the steady heartbeat of the kayak beneath you. The wind shifts as you paddle back toward familiar shores, carrying a subtle scent of driftwood and distant fires. It's a reminder that life continues beyond the sea's vast expanse, that the kayak's journey is both an escape and a return. You notice how the kayak handles differently now, the hull gliding effortlessly over ripples stirred by the breeze, responding to your every subtle adjustment. It's a conversation without words. You steer, it obeys. You lean forward, it accelerates. You ease back, it settles. There's an odd comfort in this back and forth, a quiet dance where your presence is felt but never forced. The kayak is patient, like an old friend who understands when you're tired or distracted. It carries you with ease, even as the light dims and shadows stretch long. The landscape around you morphs gradually, from the stark whiteness of ice to the muted browns and grays of tundra beginning to show through the snow. You can almost sense the seasons shifting beneath the frozen surface, a slow awakening preparing for spring's return. As you paddle, your mind drifts to stories told around the fire. Tales of daring voyages across open ocean, of kayaks weathering storms that would unseat even the hardiest sailors. You think about how the kayak's design was so well suited to the Arctic environment that some expeditions adopted it wholesale, baffling Europeans who struggled with bulkier boats. One tale stands out, a legendary journey in the 19th century when an Inuit hunter crossed hundreds of miles in a kayak, navigating ice floes and fierce winds to trade goods and news between distant communities. It was a feat of endurance and skill that still echoes in oral histories. You also remember the less well-known stories, the whispered accounts of kayaks used in espionage or stealth missions during times of conflict. Silent, swift, and nearly invisible, they became the perfect vessels for moving undetected along coasts and fjords. It's fascinating how a simple craft could serve so many roles beyond hunting and travel. There's a certain irony in that versatility, how something designed for survival became a tool for strategy, even resistance. The kayak's quiet power is a reminder that strength often lies in subtlety. The sun slips below the horizon, leaving a lingering afterglow that paints the sky in shades of rose and lavender. The water reflects these colors, turning your path into a shimmering ribbon of light. You feel a calm settle over you, the fatigue of the day easing into peaceful contentment. You steer toward a small inlet where smoke rises faintly from a campfire. The promise of warmth and companionship calls to you, a gentle contrast to the solitary paddling of earlier hours. You land the kayak softly, its familiar weight shifting beneath you as you step out. As you gather your gear, you take a moment to run your hands over the kayak's surface. Each scratch and discoloration tells a story, of waves conquered, cold nights endured, and moments of quiet reflection like this one. It's a history written not in books but in wood and skin. You pause to consider the kayak's place in the modern world. While many now use motorboats or snowmobiles, the kayak endures, cherished for its simplicity and connection to tradition. Some communities even hold races or festivals celebrating these vessels, blending ancient skill with contemporary joy. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how much the kayak has changed over time, whether it's remained true to its origins or evolved beyond recognition. Some say the modern versions lose something essential, while others believe adaptation is itself a form of survival. You lean back, gazing up as the first stars twinkle overhead. The night wraps around you like a soft cloak, and the kayak rests quietly beside you, still and patient. Tomorrow will bring another journey, another chance to glide across the frozen seas, to feel the pulse of history beneath your hands and the endless sky above. For now, you simply breathe in the stillness, grateful for this moment where time slows, and the kayak carries you safely home. You push off from the small inlet with a sense of finality that feels unexpectedly tender. The kayak settles onto the water like a calm heartbeat returning to rest after exertion. The sky is a vast expanse of pearl and lavender, and you realize that today's journey will carry you through the last stretches of open sea before the land curves back towards more frozen horizons. There is a palpable sense that this paddle is both an ending and a beginning, a nod to cycles that repeat even as they transform. The kayak glides smoothly, its hull tracing a slender thread across the sea's pale surface. You lean forward and dip your paddle into the water, feeling the familiar resistance, a tactile dialogue that has outlasted seasons and generations. Every stroke speaks of continuity, from ancient ancestors who first crafted crude hide boats, to modern paddlers revitalizing traditional designs for recreation and cultural expression. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. The kayaks seen by European explorers in the late 18th century were often described as little canoes fashioned like arrows, marvels of indigenous engineering that allowed Inuit to navigate ice-laden waters with astonishing agility. Today, you aren't hunting. You're here to witness the living bond between the kayak, the sea, and those who still cherish this craft as a cultural keystone. Across the pale horizon, you spot faint silhouettes of icebergs, remnants of glaciers calving far upstream, drifting slowly toward your path. Their edges gleam like translucent marble in the soft light, and you feel a gentle reverence for their longevity. Each berg is a storyteller, carrying memories of frozen valleys, mountaintop snows, and countless tides. Your kayak drifts closer to an ice floe, and you pause to rest a hand on the prow, feeling the slight chill through the skin. This contact is a reminder of the unbroken chain linking past and present, Inuit ancestors whose names may be forgotten, but whose spirits linger in every ridge of ice and every hushed breath of wind. You remember a quirky tidbit. Some elders say that when ice melts, you can hear echoes of ancient drums beneath the surface, as if the sea itself retains the heartbeat of performers long gone. Whether literal or poetic, the notion underscores a profound respect for everything beneath your feet and beneath your boat. You paddle onward, weaving through a network of small flows, mindful that ice remains unpredictable. As you navigate, you can't help but notice the occasional tiny grotto or ice arch, carved by sun and salt, resembling miniature cathedrals. You steer gently beneath one such arch. Its underside is a deep azure, a color so intense it feels like looking into another world. Light filters through and flickers, dappling your boat's deck with shifting patterns. You feel something akin to awe, an overwhelming sense that you're momentarily suspended between two realms, the tangible present and the timeless depths of Arctic myth. Further along, you see a cluster of native huts on a distant shore, their entrances facing the sea as if in quiet salute. You imagine these settlements buzzing with winter preparations, the rhythmic chopping of ice blocks for homes, the muffled laughter of children practicing on small sleds, elders gathering to share stories of hunts past and harvests to come. You recall scholars still debating how much contact between Inuit and Norse settlers influenced kayak design. Their exchange of sewn boats called kayaks and small open fishing craft called fadno is both documented and disputed in various sagas. Historians still question whether certain design elements, like the toggle harpoon, spread between cultures or arose independently, and you recognize that part of the kayak's magic is its role in these intersecting narratives. You push further out into open water, the current carrying you like a forgotten lullaby. The sun dips low, casting long, soft rays that paint the sea in shades of gold and rose. Your kayak becomes a silhouette, a thin line carving through a glowing expanse. You pause to reflect on how the kayak has endured as more than just a vessel. It is a carrier of identity. Young paddlers today race in fiberglass replicas at Arctic festivals, their laughter echoing like modern drumbeats over frozen inlets. Elders watch with pride as ancient designs are revived, not merely for functionality but as declarations of cultural resilience. Your thoughts drift to the kayak's role in art and film, how Inuit creators have portrayed each slender hull as a gateway to memory. You think of a documentary shown at an international festival last year, where a filmmaker traced the journey of a single kayak passed down through 6 generations. Each repair, each modification, each drop of oil applied to its seams became a frame in a visual tapestry of ancestry. Viewers worldwide marveled at how a simple boat could narrate centuries of adaptation, grief, celebration, and survival. On the water now, you sense the kayak beneath you almost humming, a resonance that aligns with your own heartbeat. It knows you're near the end of this journey, but it also knows that a kayaker's path is seldom truly complete. There will always be another tide, another channel to explore, another generation eager to learn the subtleties of silent paddling. A lone seabird wheels overhead, its cry brief and melodic. You watch as it dips down, skimming low over the water before lifting again. The bird's flight is a living metaphor, effortless yet deliberate, freedom shaped by necessity. Like the kayak, it moves between air and water, guided by instincts honed over millennia. You let the kayak drift rather than paddle, appreciating the gentle push of the current. In this weightless moment, you feel the confluence of every paddler's experiences, hunters, explorers, artists, melding into a single present. There is no need to claim ownership of this craft. Instead, you honor it by understanding that it belongs to all who have touched its frame, all who have felt its lift against the waves. Gradually, the shoreline begins to materialize once more, dark silhouettes of hills and dunes, small specks of settlement. You guide the kayak toward a familiar beach, where a small group awaits, friends who paddled ahead, eager to celebrate this concluding leg of your voyage. They stand near a stack of kayaks, each unique in length, width, and decoration, yet all sharing that essential elegance. They wave, faces glowing in the waning light, and you smile, feeling the warmth of community even in this vast expanse of ice and water. You steer the kayak ashore, lifting the prow onto the smooth stones. Every movement feels full of meaning, each shift in weight a reminder of the intimate relationship between paddler and craft. You step out of the cockpit and run a hand along the deck lines, touching the sinew lashings and smooth hide. You breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of brine and drying skin, a fragrance that feels both ancient and immediate. As you gather your gear, you glance back at the water. The kayak, now empty, floats briefly before settling against the shore. It seems to exhale, a final whisper of gratitude for another journey completed. You realize that while this chapter ends here, the kayak's story continues. In the hands of those who will follow, children who will learn to paddle tomorrow, artisans who will dream of building the next hull, it will live on, steadfast and patient. Now, dear listener, close your eyes and let the final echoes of paddle strokes dissolve into calm. You rest here, beside the shore, embraced by a world where ice and sea share quiet conversation. Breathe slowly, feeling your chest rise and fall like the gentle swell of waves. There is no need to rush. The Arctic night stretches soft and forgiving, its hush inviting you to surrender to stillness. Imagine the kayak gently rocking at the water's edge, its form a silent promise that journeys always begin again. As you sink into sleep, let the cold's edge soften, let each breath carry you deeper into ease. Know that beneath layers of ice and shadow, life endures, persistent, subtle, and wise. Tomorrow may bring new paddles, new conversations with wind and wave, but for now, let all motion rest. Take comfort in the unending rhythm of this frozen sea, its constancy a lullaby for your dreams. Drift into gentle night, cradled by memory, curiosity, and the enduring pulse of a world shaped by kinship between human, boat, and tide.